So then the next chapter in this thing is that one of the people up in Canada writes me and says, "Is your water DDW water?" And I said, "What is DDW water?" He says, "Deuterium depleted water." And I said, "I have no idea." And he goes, "Oh, it's great because I run the marathon and I've been able to knock 2 minutes off of my marathon and I recover faster. I notice that when I drink your water, that instead of having to wait 3 days to recover, I'm ready to do it the next day." And we've heard this from a couple of athletes now, that their recovery times are extremely fast. Mm-hmm. And I'm going, oh, okay, yes, is this like new age again? Or, I'm trying to be very scientific on what I'm doing. I'm taking a lot of care. I'm going to the top professional people in material sciences, physics, biology. I'm trying to be very careful about this and not just expound that it helps people. So he says, "No, deuterium depleted water." I said, "Okay, I'll get back to you." So after I get through contacting him, I get on the internet immediately and go, "What is deuterium depleted water?" Never heard of that one before. And it turns out that deuterium depleted water has been clinically studied by the medical profession. Some huge names out there: Mayo Clinic, Cleveland Clinic, Stanford University, universities in Russia, Hungary, yeah. And they've studied it, and they found out that deuterium depleted water not only cures depression in human beings, but their initial studies on mice find out that it is stopping cancer in mice. So I'm going, okay, well, this isn't a fad. It's not new age, but I've never heard of it before. So I delve into what deuterium depleted water is. And deuterium, most water on the face of the earth has 156 parts of deuterium in its water. And then let me explain what deuterium is. A good analogy is it's a heavy hydrogen. Hydrogen has usually one proton and one electron in it. And materials can also have something called neutrons in them also. They can have protons, neutrons, and electrons. And a neutron does nothing. It's neutral, but it's just heavy. An example of that is if I have a calf and a bull next to each other. The calf is normal hydrogen. The bull is deuterium, or the heavy hydrogen. And the heavy hydrogen can do a lot more damage than the little baby calf can. So we're all drinking 156 parts per million normally of water. And that neutron is the bull that runs around in our body that hits other elements in our body and causes damage, free radicals, because it's a big heavy guy and it can knock everybody around. Whereas the little baby calf just kind of bounces off and doesn't do anything. That's how our water is kind of constructed. So when you deplete the deuterium, you get rid of a lot of these bulls that are running around. Your body likes it faster. It actually is curing depression in people. You don't need Prozac, you need light water, basically is what it is. So I'm going, okay, this is incredible, but I have no proof that ours is deuterium depleted water. So I start calling around the entire scientific committee. I read all the papers and I say, how did you test for it? Well, we do this and it takes like a week to determine if your water is deuterium depleted. I said, well, can you look at mine? No, we can't, because it takes 3 doctors and doctorates and postdoctorates, and we did all this and it's very hard to do. So after about 2 months of searching and calling all the lead people up in the field, I found out a place that makes those machines that can do the testing for those people that are much quicker. So I call them up and say, can you run a sample of my water? No, we don't do samples of water. If you want to buy a machine, it's about $80,000.
Wow.
And I said, what do you do? What do you test it for? Well, it turns out that's how they're testing geophysic age of continents and glaciers, by looking at the deuterium that's in it. And they can also tell where water came from. And they're using that same technique on other planets that they'd like to do to see the age of the water and stuff like that. So
Okay.
this is not something you run down to your grocery store and say, can you test this?
Right.
And I begged them to be able to test it for me, and they said, no, you got to buy the machine. I said, well, if I buy the machine, then how hard is it to test it? Well, do you have a doctorate in isotopes? And I said, no. And he said, well, it'll take about 3 months to train for you to be able to do this. And I go, so it's impossible to really test it, isn't it? And they said, basically, yes, unless you are a big lab. If you're NASA or somebody like that, or part of the government, yeah, they probably have people who can do it. I said, can you tell me who you sold the machines to? I'll call them up. No, we can't because of the privacy. And they said, oh, but there is one place in the United States, University of California, Davis, they're radioisotope labs. I said, radioisotope labs, what do they do? And they said, we test everything for radioisotopes. I said, can I call them up? And I said, yeah, because they're a public institution, you can do it. So I called UC Davis up. There's a lot of people that are claiming that they have deuterium depleted water. Mm-hmm. And I've called to ask for their test results and how they tested it, and they don't exist. They didn't go through this whole rigmarole. They're just calling their water deuterium depleted because it's a nice catchphrase.
And they suppose it's deuterium.
And they suppose.
Because of the source, because it is naturally occurring, or it can be supposedly. So they suppose it's deuterium depleted.
Yeah. So I call UC Davis up and say, would you test this for me? And they said, what for? And they said, drinking water. And they said, drinking water? We don't do drinking water. I said, okay, if I come out there and knock on your door and I have samples, would you test it for me? Sure, we'll test it. It costs X number of dollars to have it tested. I said, have you ever had anyone else ask to test the drinking water? And she laughed and goes, no, why would anyone want to drink testing water? Or test drinking water? And I said, because of deuterium depletion. And she says, but what does that have to do with drinking water? And I said, so no one else has ever approached your labs? She said, no. I said, okay. So we went to a show called BevNet this past year, beverage industry, and they're outside of, they were in LA. UC Davis, of course, is in Davis, which is near Stanford. And so we went to Stanford because that's where I have some of my glass made for my device. And they make all the devices for all the physicists out there for Stanford University and for the government. And they make my stuff. So then I went to UC Davis and knocked on their door after we drove around for about an hour, and found them and walked up and said, here's the samples. And she said, I had no idea why you want to test water for drinking, but yeah, we'll do it because, you know, we're a public institution. So they tested my samples, and I gave it to them in early December. Mm-hmm. And waited and waited and waited, and nothing happened. And so I called about January, and I said, do you have my test results? And she said, oh, by the way, the person that was going to test your water, we forgot to tell you, she got sick with pneumonia, and she took an indefinite leave of absence in December, and we don't know when she's going to be back. And I said, but I want my test results. And she said, okay, you know. So I talked to the head of the lab, the one who runs the department, and then she ran those for me in early February. Mm-hmm. And we just got the results back that showed, yes, we have deuterium depleted water. We have about 25 parts per million.
125.
Yeah.
Yeah, about 125 to 130
Yeah.
parts per million. And that's just with the regular drinking water. That's not even with, we haven't even tested the water that's been through our process 5 or 10 times, which I know Jeff was also a big fan of, was
Yeah.
the Tenex catalyst, which people have used topically and things like that. So that's just even just touching the tip of the iceberg. It'd be really interesting to know, what it is when we can put it through the process further. But it is considered scientifically light water then because of the deuterium depletion.
So we have deuterium depleted water. So that's the third thing.